They told us the war was over in 1945, but not everything ended when the bombs stopped falling. Hidden deep in government vaults and buried beneath decades of silence are files so disturbing, they were completely erased from the history books. From twisted human experiments to vanished cities and occult rituals gone wrong, these aren't your average World War II tales. These are the forbidden stories, the ones you were never supposed to hear. In February 1944, beneath the frostbitten veil of the Arctic Circle, a small Allied convoy left a classified naval base in northern Scotland. Composed of 3 modified cargo ships and 2 escort destroyers, it carried no national markings. Officially, the convoy didn't exist. Its mission, known only to a handful of high-clearance officials in London and Washington, was labeled Operation Silent Tide. Its purpose: to transport a top-secret military payload to a hidden research station on the northern tip of Greenland. The mission never arrived. No Mayday calls, no wreckage. Just silence. Decades later, the British Ministry of Defence quietly declassified a set of heavily redacted wartime communications. Among them was a chilling entry: Convoy S-Tide overdue. Last ping 180 miles northwest of Jan Mayen. No survivors expected. Archive and seal. Nothing more. Speculation quickly filled the gaps. What exactly was Silent Tide carrying that required such secrecy, even after the war? A retired MI6 logistics officer, Arthur Granger, broke his silence in 1983 in a private interview that was never aired publicly. His words were captured in a worn audio cassette labeled simply, "For History." Granger's trembling voice told of a new propulsion system, a hybrid of nuclear and electromagnetic principles, meant to power a new generation of long-range bombers. "It was beyond anything we'd ever touched," he said. "The Americans called it a leap across time." But that wasn't the only cargo aboard. Granger claimed a sealed crate, roughly the size of a small truck, was loaded onto the lead ship, HMS Lancer. Guarded by American scientists and military police, it was referred to cryptically as the Organ. No one, not even the ship's captain, was permitted to know what was inside. Around the same time, German U-boat records, recovered in 1946 but buried in obscure naval archives, showed abnormal activity in the Arctic corridor. U-492, captained by Klaus Richter, had reported in his final logbook, interference in instruments, impossible magnetic behavior. Strange light in northern sky. Convoy observed briefly, then lost. No contact since. That was the last entry before U-492 was sunk by unknown means. In the 1960s, a Soviet submarine performing a routine Arctic survey stumbled across a large metallic object embedded in the seafloor near the supposed last known position of the convoy. The Soviets called it Object K-16. Sonar images revealed what appeared to be the broken hull of a warship fused unnaturally with another structure, one the analysts described as non-standard, possibly non-terrestrial in design. The Kremlin classified the data instantly. A defecting Soviet engineer, Viktor Malinov, later described the object as giving off a weak radioactive signature and containing components beyond our comprehension. Eyewitnesses on the periphery of the mystery began surfacing and disappearing. In 1974, Elizabeth Carrington, whose father served aboard one of the lost ships, received an unmarked package, her father's journal. It contained scrawled entries about a sphere of light in the ice, lost time, and hearing music without sound. She turned it over to a historian at Oxford. He died in a freak fire 2 weeks later. The journal was never seen again. Another survivor, Harold Meeks, had been a young communications officer stationed at a Norwegian radar station. He later confessed in a nursing home that on February 17, 1944, they tracked a massive magnetic anomaly, moving rapidly across the sky near the convoy's route. "It wasn't a storm," he insisted. "It wasn't natural." And then, nothing. "They told us to destroy the tapes and never speak of it again." A memo uncovered in 2002 in the U.S. National Archives hinted at an internal CIA investigation into the matter as late as 1965. It read, Operation Silent Tide. Recommend continued suppression of all public inquiry. Material loss unacceptable. Potential encounter classified X4 level. Witnesses flagged. The X4 level designation was later tied to anomalous aerial phenomena, what we now call UFOs. So what truly happened to the ghost convoy? Was it an encounter with an unexplained force? A sabotage mission cloaked in Allied betrayal? Or an experiment gone catastrophically wrong? In 2011, a Norwegian oil expedition scanned a trench north of Greenland and briefly captured a sonar image of what resembled a submerged hull with jagged, unnatural extensions. The image was dismissed as glacial anomalies by official sources. But those who've studied Operation Silent Tide believe otherwise. Some theorists argue the convoy was testing more than advanced tech. It was the beginning of weaponizing dimensional physics, a notion whispered in the most classified scientific circles of the time. Others suggest the British and American governments agreed to erase all trace of the mission, fearing the truth would cause mass panic during an already fragile war effort. What remains indisputable is this: 5 ships and over 300 men vanished in one of the most heavily monitored regions of the world at the time. No wreckage, no bodies, no answers, only whispers, altered records, and the chilling phrase repeatedly typed in military archives: lost under silent tide. In the winter of 1943, when the Atlantic winds howled with icy rage, a forgotten corner of the Scottish coast became the site of one of World War II's darkest secrets. Known only to select personnel within British military intelligence, Blackrock Island was little more than a jagged outcropping of basalt and mist. It didn't appear on standard naval charts. Civilians called it cursed. But for a short and deadly period, it housed a top-secret facility where the line between war effort and war crime was blurred beyond recognition. Blackrock Island's official designation was Facility 114B, a psychological warfare research center under the control of the Special Operations Executive, SOE. It was built into the island's cave systems, reinforced with concrete, and powered by a rudimentary generator system. But it wasn't the harsh conditions that made the post unbearable, it was the orders. The facility's purpose was to test experimental interrogation techniques and psychological manipulation on German POWs, many of whom had been captured during covert night raids in Norway and Holland. The scientists, brought in under the cloak of national security, weren't just interested in military secrets. They wanted to study how far the human mind could be pushed before it broke, and how that breaking could be replicated, controlled, and weaponized. Staff Sergeant Colin Wexley, one of the few surviving operatives stationed there, described the facility decades later in a private journal found posthumously in 1995. "We thought we were there to protect the island. We were guarding something far worse. We were the watchers, but the ones in charge, the ones in the white coats, they didn't sleep. They whispered to each other at night. Their eyes were wrong. The prisoners weren't just interrogated. They were isolated for weeks in pitch darkness, subjected to auditory hallucinations through experimental sound wave exposure. Some were drugged with a compound known only as MK-beta, a precursor to LSD developed from a German chemist's stolen notes. The scientists believed they could create programmable agents, spies whose memories could be rewritten and erased at will. One of the lead researchers, Dr. Oswald Marlowe, had previously worked on psychological conditioning techniques for bomber pilots. At Blackrock, he took his experiments to horrifying extremes. In a recovered memo sent to the War Office in December 1943, he wrote, "Subject 12 exhibits complete obedience after Phase 4. No recollection of identity. Recommend accelerated trials with multiple subjects." The final straw came on January 4, 1944. Private Lyle Donovan, a 21-year-old radio technician, stumbled into the lower chamber of the facility during a power outage. According to a classified report later recovered from the SOE archives, Donovan saw a room filled with prisoners strapped to chairs, their eyes forced open, mouths agape in silent screams. Strange machinery pulsed with light above them. The guards, overcome with guilt, had refused to continue the procedures. What followed was chaos. The next morning, 8 soldiers, led by Corporal David Hensley, locked the scientists in the upper dormitories and took control of the island. They attempted to contact Naval Command using the emergency transmitter, but the signal was jammed. Hours later, 2 Royal Navy gunships approached the island. Hensley and his men held their position, demanding an investigation and threatening to release records. But no investigation came. The orders were clear: suppress rebellion. Secure sensitive assets. No witnesses. The gunships opened fire. The facility was shelled until only smoke and stone remained. Reports filed afterwards stated that a German U-boat had launched an attack on the island, and all personnel were declared killed in action. But this narrative didn't hold for long. In 1962, a fisherman from Ullapool dragged up a sealed metal container from the seabed. Inside were photographs of the facility, along with a blood-stained notebook belonging to Corporal Hensley. In it, he wrote, "They'll call it mutiny. But we were the only ones sane. What they did to those men, it wasn't for victory. It was for control." The photographs showed a crude operation theater, charts of neurological experiments, and a blackboard covered in disjointed German and English phrases. One phrase stood out in bold chalk: "Identity is a variable." When the fisherman turned the contents over to the authorities, he was visited by 2 men posing as intelligence agents. Days later, his boat exploded in the harbor under mysterious circumstances. For decades, survivors remained silent. But whispers persisted. Blackrock Island was avoided by locals and remained uninhabited. Attempts to land there were blocked by the Ministry of Defense, citing environmental instability. Satellite images show what appear to be the remains of foundation structures embedded into the cliffside. In 1998, a historian named Margaret Luce gained partial access to a set of forgotten SOE documents. Within them was a personnel file listing 22 men stationed at Facility 114B. Of those, 17 were declared Kia, 2 were transferred, and 3 were simply listed as unknown disposition. Of the 3 missing, 1 was Private Lyle Donovan. He resurfaced in Canada under a different name, discovered by Luce shortly before his death in 2003. In a final interview, he whispered, "They didn't want us to break the enemy. They wanted to break the human soul, to reassemble it." Blackrock wasn't a failure. It was a prototype. Blackrock Island has never been publicly acknowledged. No memorial exists. The families of those lost were given medals and fabricated citations. The official record still lists Facility 114B as unconfirmed. But the truth, buried in the fractured minds of a few broken men, remains like a scar on the conscience of history. In the spring of 1945, when victory in Europe was within reach and Allied forces were pushing deep into Axis territory, a little-known African-American unit, the 614th Tank Destroyer Battalion, received what would be their final orders. Formed in 1942 and often sidelined due to racial discrimination, the battalion had earned a reputation for resilience, tactical brilliance, and bravery in combat. Yet their story, unlike those of many other wartime heroes, was buried, not by accident, but by design. The 614th was stationed in northern Italy when an encrypted communique rerouted them to the Val Morta, or Dead Valley, a desolate region in the Italian Alps near the Swiss border. Their mission, according to the surviving orders uncovered in 1986 by a U.S. Army historian, was to locate and neutralize a classified enemy installation, believed to be producing chemical and biological weapons. At the time, Allied High Command feared that remnants of the Waffen-SS were preparing to unleash a final, desperate onslaught using unregulated bioweapons stored in hidden Alpine bunkers. Intelligence reports suggested that a top Nazi virologist, Dr. Otto Weiss, had established a remote lab known as Station Tau, a facility so secret that even German officers refused to speak of it openly. The 614th, under the leadership of Lieutenant Colonel Harmon Cole, was chosen not just for their combat ability but for their expendability in the eyes of upper command. They were given little support, vague coordinates, and a chilling directive: under no circumstances allow Station Tau personnel or materials to reach the Swiss border. By April 4th, the battalion entered Val Morta, a frozen wasteland of pine forests and jagged cliffs. Locals had long believed the valley to be cursed. No birds sang there. Animals avoided it. Snow fell but never melted. The men of the 614th, seasoned by war, were not superstitious, but what they found began to unravel that certainty. The first team sent to scout the area, 10 men in a half-track, never returned. When a second unit followed the trail, they found the vehicle abandoned, its doors open, weapons untouched. All 10 soldiers were missing. The snow showed no signs of struggle. Only a series of strange symbols carved into nearby trees, crude spirals, jagged XS, and the German word ein, scrawled repeatedly in what appeared to be ash or dried blood. Within days, morale eroded. Radios picked up distorted transmissions, German voices calling for help, then laughing. Equipment malfunctioned inexplicably. Men began experiencing hallucinations, shadows moving through the snow, whispers under the ground, memories that weren't their own. One soldier, Private Jeremiah Bass, was found staring into the forest, repeating in a flat voice, "They're not dead. They're learning." Then, on April 7th, the battalion discovered Station Tau, half buried in a cliffside, camouflaged by snow and darkness. What remained of the lab was in ruins. Scorched walls. Collapsed tunnels. Yet something had survived. Inside the main chamber were rows of containment tubes, shattered and empty. A mural painted on the ceiling depicted twisted humanoid forms sprouting vines and fungal growths from their faces. Written below in Latin, "Vita per mortem," life through death. Among the wreckage, they recovered documents outlining a Nazi experiment to create a symbiotic virus, one that could preserve neural functions in dead tissue and potentially reanimate fallen soldiers for battlefield reuse. It sounded insane, science fiction. But the files were real, complete with clinical records, diagrams, and notes from Dr. Weiss himself. One entry read, "Subject 4-1 began speaking 6 minutes post-mortem. No respiration. Brain active. Must reduce aggression levels." That night, a snowstorm trapped the unit in the valley. One by one, patrols disappeared. Gunshots echoed in the distance. The battalion survivors attempted to retreat, but the mountain pass had collapsed. They were boxed in. Over the next 48 hours, survivors reported being attacked, not by Nazis, but by something else. Figures wearing tattered Wehrmacht uniforms, eyes blackened, skin bleached and split, moving in jerky, unnatural motions. Corporal Theo Langston, one of the few who kept a journal, described the final days. "We fight things that do not bleed. They speak in our voices." One wore Cole's coat. But the colonel was dead. His last entry ended with, "We lit the fire. We lit it big. They won't leave the valley." And that's where the official record ends. The 614th was declared MIA. Their final known position was marked as lost in combat. No rescue mission was mounted. The area was sealed by U.S. forces with orders to avoid civilian access indefinitely. Post-war maps erased Val Morta entirely. And when families of the fallen demanded answers, they were told their sons died in a transportation accident during redeployment. No honors. No medals. No closure. For decades, silence prevailed, until 1986, when a team of hikers near the Swiss border discovered a rusted metal sign partially buried in snow. It read simply, TAU, Zone 5, Verboten, in faded German lettering. Beneath it were 2 skeletons in American uniforms. Dog tags confirmed their identities, Sergeant Alphonse Green and Private Jonah Mercer, both of the 614th. The discovery triggered brief interest from military historians and journalists, but was swiftly buried under bureaucracy. One retired colonel, when questioned, said only, "That unit did what we asked. And we paid them back with erasure." Not all enemies wore swastikas. Today, few remember the 614th Tank Destroyer Battalion. They are a ghost unit, honored only by rumor and the persistent curiosity of a few independent researchers. But their sacrifice, erased from the textbooks, remains etched in the hidden corners of wartime history. In the valley where no birds sing, their final march continues in silence. Tucked deep within the Teutoburg forest of Westphalia, the Wewelsburg Castle was an architectural curiosity that had long fascinated German mystics. But during the Nazi regime, it became something far more sinister. Under the direct command of Heinrich Himmler, the castle was transformed into the occult epicenter of the SS, a place of ancient rituals, bizarre research, and a project so dark it was erased from all official records. Operation Wolfenherz. While history acknowledges that Himmler was obsessed with the occult, runes, and Aryan myth, the full extent of what occurred within Wewelsburg's stone walls during the final years of the war was buried in layers of secrecy. What the public never knew was that beginning in 1943, the SS initiated a program within the castle's North Tower, one designed not to develop weapons, but to create a new kind of soldier. The operation was led by Standartenführer Karl Weissmann, a biologist turned occultist, and his inner circle of 12 researchers dubbed Die Nachtbrüder, the Night Brothers. With support from the Ahnenerbe, the Nazi archaeological and pseudoscientific division, Weissmann blended fringe genetics with Norse mythology and ancient Slavic folklore. Their goal, to awaken what they referred to as the dormant predator within the Aryan bloodline. British intelligence first learned of something strange happening at Wewelsburg through the testimony of a defected Polish laborer, Marek Zlota, who had helped repair parts of the castle's subterranean levels. He described hidden laboratories, strange howls at night, and prisoners being dragged in but never leaving. In his words, "They were not making men stronger. They were trying to make men into something else." Zlota also reported seeing documents labeled with strange titles, lupus gene activation, Sang de Gotterblut, and most hauntingly, Phase Drei, Selbstverlust. Many of the files included anatomical drawings of humans with exaggerated canine features, elongated jaws, muscular growths, eyes dilated unnaturally. British handlers assumed he was suffering from trauma-induced hallucinations. But they kept watching. In March 1945, as Allied forces closed in on Nazi strongholds, an elite U.S. reconnaissance unit known as Shadow Company was sent to secure Wewelsburg. Their mission was to retrieve any intelligence before the Soviets could reach it. What they found was worse than any war document. The operation log from Captain Ellis Renner, one of the few surviving records, described the scene upon arrival. Castle appears abandoned. No power. Heavy smell. Iron. Rot. Library torched. Found antechamber with blood marks in a circle. Symbols on the walls. Not Latin, not German. Something older. Descending into the lower levels, the unit discovered reinforced chambers and observation rooms behind one-way mirrors. Inside, chains embedded in the walls, claw marks across stone, and dried human remains. The deeper they went, the stranger things became. One soldier, Private Lucas Hayes, found a preserved human heart suspended in fluid connected to what looked like a primitive machine. Another discovered a pit containing over a dozen corpses, each with mutilated jaws, elongated limbs, and eyes missing entirely. A journal, recovered from Weissmann's quarters, contained phrases in German such as, "The blood remembers, only pain reveals the beast," and "They live between breaths." The final entry read, "Tonight, the 12th subject awakens. If it holds, we open the gate." The team made radio contact with command and requested immediate extraction. Before it could arrive, something emerged from the lower chambers. Only one survivor, Lieutenant Franklin Morse, was found alive days later, wandering the woods, incoherent and bleeding. He was flown back to England for recovery but was declared psychologically unfit to testify. His final words, recorded in a debriefing transcript, were, "It wasn't a man. It wore skin like a costume. Eyes like black glass. We emptied our rifles. It smiled." Wewelsburg Castle was bombed from the air 2 weeks later by American planes, the ruins sealed and eventually handed over to West German authorities. Publicly, the story was spun as a symbolic gesture, destroying one of the ideological heartlands of the SS. Privately, it was a quarantine. Years later, declassified OSS documents hinted that Operation Wolfenherz was not merely a myth. Scientists smuggled into the U.S. under Operation Paperclip brought fragments of Weissmann's work, some of which were destroyed, others absorbed into dark research divisions like MKUltra's biological offshoots. A controversial document surfaced in 1994 in a Freedom of Information Act release. It contained a blurry photograph of a mutilated cadaver recovered in Bavaria in 1946, with a handwritten note, "Not human. Wewelsburg proximity. Recommend full biological incineration." The photo vanished from the record weeks later. To this day, rumors persist of night patrols near the forested ruins of Wewelsburg, reporting howls that seem to echo across the valley. Locals refuse to enter the grounds at night. Some claim the SS were trying to tap into ancient shapeshifter myths. Others believe Operation Wolfenherz was an early experiment in bio-weaponized mutation, drawing from stolen Soviet and Nordic folklore. But perhaps the most unsettling possibility is the one no one dares entertain aloud, that something worked. Something changed. And something, or someone, walked out of that castle into the fog of war and never came back. In the waning days of World War II, as Tokyo smoldered from relentless Allied bombing and Japan teetered on the edge of surrender, an entire district in the city vanished from all maps. Not destroyed. Not evacuated. Vanished. This wasn't due to bombs or military secrecy. It was the result of something the Japanese government, and later the American occupation forces, agreed never to discuss. The area was codenamed by U.S. intelligence as the Tokyo Lightless Zone. The district in question, officially part of Tokyo's Koto Ward, was once known as Tsuyazaki Quarter, a neighborhood of about 12,000 people. Workers, shopkeepers, elderly, children. It lay close to a military communication base and a storage compound belonging to Unit 731, Japan's infamous biological warfare division. But unlike Unit 731's operations in Manchuria, Tsuyazaki wasn't a site of experiments. It was the testing ground for something that defied war, logic, and even time. In June 1945, with B-29 bombers tightening the noose and Tokyo's infrastructure disintegrating, Japanese scientists under the shadowy Division 9, a splinter of Unit 731, launched Project Kurayami, Eternal Darkness. They had stumbled upon fragments of forbidden research during an earlier raid in China, Taoist texts and obscure Mongolian scrolls referencing the light behind the skin of the world. It was believed that with the right frequencies, geometries, and conditions, a person, or place, could be shifted partially out of the visible dimension. The Tsuyazaki Quarter was the experiment. Residents began reporting strange phenomena. Windows showed no reflections. Shadows moved in the opposite direction of light. Electronics failed, and at night, the entire district seemed unnaturally silent. Not just quiet, void. Sound, light, even emotion, gone. Then, people began to disappear. One man was seen walking into his home and never emerged. When neighbors entered to check, the house was empty, but every mirror inside was shattered inward. Clocks stopped at 3:33 a.m. What happened next was so extraordinary that it sent the highest levels of both Japanese and American command into a coordinated panic. On August 4, 1945, 5 days before the Hiroshima bombing, a U.S. reconnaissance plane flying over Tokyo captured a high-resolution photo of the Tsuyazaki district. The image showed a perfectly square section of the city, about 8 blocks wide, in total blackness. Not shadow, not destruction, but pitch black, as if light itself had been devoured. The surrounding streets, cars, and rooftops were visible, even clear. But the zone was lightless. The photo was sent to intelligence services and labeled Top Secret, Phenomenon T. When U.S. ground forces entered Tokyo in September, one of their unofficial tasks was to secure and investigate the lightless zone. An 8-man special research unit led by Major Douglas Mercer of the OSS arrived in Tsuyazaki with orders to document and recover any scientific materials left by Division 9. Only 2 returned. The survivors, Captain Harold Ridges and Private Miles Carter, were flown out of Japan and never reassigned to duty. A debriefing transcript from October 1945, buried under decades of classified status, was leaked in 2007. In it, Ridges describes their entry into the zone. It was like walking through glass. At the threshold, the air bent. Sound dimmed. Miles and I felt pressure on our teeth and ears, like we were underwater. The buildings were intact, but nothing worked. Watches spun. Our flashlights went out. The others went in deeper. Then, screaming. Not like pain. Like seeing something you shouldn't. According to Ridges, the buildings had been physically altered. Walls were wrong, not at odd angles, but inconsistent. Floors shifted. They saw civilians frozen mid-step, eyes rolled back, faces contorted in expressions of terror or awe. He described what looked like living shadows, humanoid shapes without mass or light, moving against the grain of reality. "We didn't stay," he said. "We couldn't." The U.S. command sealed off the area. Japan, now under occupation, agreed to erase all public records of Tsuyazaki. Residents were listed as casualties of a firebombing that never occurred. Maps were redrawn. Concrete walls erected. The new name for the district on official charts became Zone 0. From 1946 to 1952, American military scientists quietly conducted dimensional analysis studies within the zone. One report noted, photons behave unpredictably. Time distortion within the core suspected. Human entry limited to 5 minutes per subject to avoid dissociation symptoms. By 1953, the zone was filled in and repurposed as a classified testing ground. No new construction permitted. When satellites became common, special filters were applied to all aerial images of central Tokyo. Civilians were never told. But Tokyo locals knew something was wrong. Elders whispered of a cursed block. No birds flew over it. Dogs refused to cross its borders. A few trespassers, thrill-seekers, drunks, conspiracy theorists, disappeared entirely, or were found days later, babbling nonsense in broken languages. One man, in 1967, was found sitting naked on the sidewalk beside Zone 0's eastern wall, chanting an old Shinto prayer known to protect against spirits of the underworld. He died shortly after, his brain showing signs of hyperelectrical activity usually only seen during seizures, except he'd had none. In 1999, a Japanese filmmaker named Hideki Maeda attempted to document the zone for an underground documentary. His footage never aired. The crew vanished. Maeda's camera was recovered, its last frame showing a completely black screen, with 2 faint, eye-shaped glows in the center. Officially, the Tsuyazaki Quarter never existed. Project Kurayami was never conducted. And Division 9? No record. But on unusually clear nights, Tokyo taxi drivers report brief blackouts near the eastern edge of Koto. Their engines stall. Radios die. They say it's nothing. Just Tokyo being strange. Every case adds a new layer of mystery, leaving more questions than answers. Which one lingers in your mind, and what's your take on what really happened?